From the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, here to welcome our viewers from around the world, including those of you who are watching on the portable TV app. I want to start by sharing with you what a high-ranking Iranian official is saying about the United States, and here it is. Iran's United Nations spokesperson says, quote, "There is an appearance that the United States is setting traps or provocations to provide an excuse to initiate armed conflict in the last days of the administration." He goes on to say, Iran is fully prepared to defend itself and will, if it comes to pass, openly and decisively. Is that what Iran is doing today? Is that what is happening right now in this region as the world once again awaits to see who will blink in the Persian Gulf in yet another showdown between Iran and a U.S. ally? Here's why. As we speak, South Korea is sending troops to the Persian Gulf as a show of force against Iran, whose Navy has just seized one of its vessels. Iran says the Korean vessel, there it is, that's a Hankuk Kimi, seen here, seriously violating marine environmental laws, says Iran. And Iran says it's going to hold it and its crew until an Iranian court rules on the case. That's the situation as it stands right now. Showdown, right? South Korea, for its part, says it's activating anti-piracy units, troops, and they're headed for the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, as we have frequently reported, is the world's most important maritime choke point and a recurring flashpoint for U.S.-Iran tensions. Suffice it to say that if an active military conflict were to break out in that narrow body of water, the entire world's economy would be severely affected. Is this simply another sign of the deteriorated relations between Iran and the United States? And if so, just how bad might it get while President Trump is still in office? We have more to report on this story, as well as analysis from several perspectives, as you'll come to expect from us here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we firmly believe it's time to do news again. So here's a list of the questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow after watching our newscast today. Who is really instigating whom in the latest conflict in the Persian Gulf? Police in Germany raid a church for face mask violations. Can they do that? Should they? And control of the U.S. Senate will be decided tonight in Georgia, but will voters turn out? All right, let's get back to the big story that we've been following. Moments ago, just as we were preparing this newscast, we learned the Trump administration is now imposing more sanctions on Iran, this time going after 17 companies and one individual connected to Iran's metals industry. Not to be outdone, earlier in the day, Iran issued an Interpol notice for the arrest of 47 U.S. officials, including President Trump, for the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. This is the backdrop as Iran seizes a South Korean vessel in the Persian Gulf. But wait, and now there's even this. We have also just learned that Chinese President Xi Jinping is ordering the Chinese army to be ready to fight at any second. Those are his words. That's a direct quote. Here now with more on this story, this setup is RT correspondent Alex Mihailovich.
As tensions heighten between the West and Iran over that country's nuclear program, South Korea has entered the arena. The latest, a South Korean tanker seized by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard.
Seizure of a South Korean flagged oil tanker in Persian Gulf waters due to violation of environmental guidelines. This tanker has been directed to one of the Iranian ports for its violations to be investigated.
According to Iranian officials, the MT Hankuk Kimi was stopped for polluting the waters of the Persian Gulf. The South Korean company that owns the vessel says it was carrying 7,200 tons of chemicals, mostly methanol, but denies the alleged pollution of the sea. The vessel, with 20 crew members on board, was traveling from Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates at the time. Some analysts believe that the ship was seized in relation to a money dispute between Iran and South Korea. Tehran has been increasing pressure on Seoul to unlock an estimated $7 billion in Iranian oil revenue. related to sales that happened prior to the Trump administration tightening sanctions on Iran's oil exports. While Iran insists that the ship's seizure is not related to the money being held by South Korea, it has reiterated its frustrations over the holding of the funds.
If anyone is to be called hostage taker, it's the Korean government who has taken hostage $7 billion of our money with false pretexts.
The head of Iran's central bank has said that the money is needed to purchase COVID-19 vaccines. When it comes to the coronavirus, Iran is the worst hit country in the Middle East, with approximately 56,000 deaths and over 1.2 million infections officially recorded. Iran hopes to purchase vaccines through COVAX, an international program designed to ensure that all countries have access to COVID-19 vaccines. While South Korea has dispatched military forces to the Persian Gulf after the seizure of the ship, it is also sending a diplomatic delegation to Iran in hopes of diffusing the situation with the Islamic Republic. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
This little device right here is going to put...
Contrasting points of view on this very important story is former British MP George Galloway, also former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan. George, let me begin with you. I mean, the level of anxiety and the number of countries involved, Iran, China, the United States, South Korea, how concerned should we be?
Well, these are very troubled days, troubled waters, and there's something far wrong with the institutional health of the United States. In this regard, the incoming administration, in just a few days, will be seeking to repair the damage done to relations with Iran, to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, to try and turn the page on what has been a very, very bloody and dismal chapter. And in the last days of the outgoing lame duck president, we've got the Chinese armed forces on instant alert, ready to fight any second. And we've got the possibility of guns blazing in the Persian Gulf. That just doesn't seem sensible, and it won't seem sensible to the mothers of the service personnel, who might very well be, for reasons of theater, political theater, losing their children in conflict that was entirely unnecessary.
John, help us understand what the thinking may be in the Trump administration with what appears to be the nearness of some kind of conflagration, which understandably has some countries concerned.
Well, first of all, I don't think conflagration is near. What we have here is we've seen many times over the Iranian regime try to ratchet up pressure to scare the world in an effort to get to essentially blackmail the world into relaxing the sanctions regime, which has been imposed by many, many countries around the world. So that's why it seized the South Korean tanker on a flimsy environmental side charge because somebody maybe peed over the side or something. Again, to try to get the headlines, to get the attention, to get that sanctions relief, because the world has had enough, frankly, of Iranian aggression throughout the world, whether it's with the Houthi rebels, Hamas, Hezbollah, their nuclear weapons program, and their missile program. They've had it. The world's kind of had it, and the Iranian regime needs to get sanctions relief if it's to survive. And this is one of their PR efforts to do that, and they do this all the time.
But do you think, John, let me just ask you very directly, as some people have suggested, that the Trump administration, this late in the game, pressing Iran and China both so heartily is responsible at this point, given the fact that we're soon going to have a new administration in the White House?
Well, first of all, the Trump administration hasn't done anything here that they haven't been doing for 4 years. The Iranians, however, are doing something different here. In this case, they seized a South Korean ship, and it's kind of a reminder to the rest of Asia that nearly all of the oil in that Asia depends on for its economy does come from the Middle East and come through the Straits of Hormuz. So what they're trying to do is draw Asia into this so they can ratchet up pressure on the United States and other countries around the world to try to relax sanctions. But, Asia has been on the U.S. side. Most of the Asian countries have been on the U.S. side in this, and so they're trying to threaten those large economies as well.
How about that, George? The Trump administration is simply doing what it's been doing all along. They're consistent, if nothing else.
Well, your guest should lose the habit of substituting United States policy for the world's policy. The vast majority of countries in the world do not want to sanction Iran. That's a straight falsehood, or an error at least. We are in Europe trying our best to cool tensions in the Persian Gulf. We are still in the Iran nuclear deal. We begged the United States not to leave it. South Korea has seized $7 billion of Iran's money, took the goods, didn't pay the bill, not because South Korea wants to sanction Iran, but because the United States will punish them if they do not. The vast majority of the world, Russia, China, India, Asia, Africa, are not at war or semi-war with Iran. It's the Trump administration that is at war with Iran. So you really must get out of the habit of imagining that what is said in Washington speaks for the world. It doesn't. The Iranians have a legitimate case that they have been picked on by Donald Trump's administration, and he is irresponsibly, if not causing yet a conflagration, dangling a torch, a fire torch, on top of the world's most important oil channel. And that really cannot be countenanced by civilized opinion in the U.S. or in the rest of the world.
John, let me give you the final word. Go ahead.
Well, that's baloney. The entire Middle East is reorienting itself because it's scared to death of Iran. Iran's the #1 exporter of terrorism around the world, and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, Arab countries, about to make peace with Israel because they're afraid of Iran.
John, George.
Saudi Arabia.
Go ahead. George, just to clarify, we're down to 20 seconds if you want to put a punctuation on this. George.
Saudi Arabia is known by everyone in the intelligence community as the fountainhead of extremism and terrorism around the world. Where do you think Al-Qaeda and ISIS get their wherewithal from? It's not Iran, it's Saudi Arabia that your guest is now praying in aid.
Great discussion. My thanks to both of you. We certainly appreciate the rigorous debate, and I think this is the kind of thing that we need to do more often. John Jordan, George Galloway, great conversation. Thanks again. Now let's talk about control of the